Okay, we're going to do this review a little different than the other two. I'm going to make some videos, and I'm not going to show you how to work every problem or anything, but I am going to remind you of some of the important stuff you might have forgot. For instance, the first thing we do on this kind of problem is we need to draw out the picture. And remember, whenever it tells us B is between, that tells us the point we need to put in the middle. So B goes here, and A and C. If it just says between, I don't know that this is exactly in the middle, I just know it's there. Then you need to put your numbers on your picture, and you need to be sure that you're answering the one it says. So this time it tells me that I'm looking for AB, so I'm looking for this part here, so be sure to put these in the right spots. You should now pause the video and work this problem, and then come back to the video. Okay, on number 2, if you remember, we had a formula for how to figure this out. And this was the formula I gave you in the notes, where we just said C is wherever this point's going to be in the middle, and A and B are these two ends. If it helps you out, just replace those letters they had in the problem with the letters that are in our formula. Then we're just going to put the fraction in here, put our A's and B's in here, and then that'll tell us where this point is here. Remember, you need to know this formula for the test, so be sure you memorize this for the test. Okay, number 3 is just like number 2, except they didn't draw the line for you. So you can either draw the line out, just like we did here, or you can go straight to the formula. And in this case, it says that B lies on the number line between A and C. So make sure that when you are working this, that you're putting C as your middle number, or C as your end number, and B as your middle one. So this ABC is not matching up with what we had here. Here, B is the one in the middle, so make sure you're making those adjustments. And number 4 is just like 3. So be sure that you're putting your letters, you're finding the right thing. Okay, now that you finished part 1, now I'm going to start explaining some of the ones on part 2. Be sure that you're pausing the video and working the problems as we go to get your hints as we go through this. On these, now we're going to look at some ones with algebra in them, and I can see the algebras right there. So remember, the first thing we need to do is draw the picture. And it tells me that L is the midpoint. And remember, that's the key word, that this tells me not only is it in the middle, but it's exactly in the middle and that both sides are equal to each other. So put your letters on the picture, M, L is the middle, and N is this side, and put these numbers on where they go. ML is this one, and Ln is this one here, 3x minus 4. And then if this is the midpoint, what do we know about those two sides? Well, if it's the midpoint, we know these two sides are equal to each other. So this is the formula you need to work out here. Pause the video and work that one. Okay, this next one is slightly different because now it's not telling me that it's the midpoint, it's just telling me it's between. So when I do that, I'm going to put my points here. I don't know that it's the middle. These are not necessarily equal. M is in the middle, and L and N are on the ends. It tells me each of these parts, so I need to put them on the correct parts. And if you remember, when we worked these out on the notes, we did pink plus blue equals purple. And that's what you should do here. So once you put these parts on here, make sure that you write your equation out as pink plus blue equals purple. Then when you're working this, remember, once you filled all your parts in here, this side over here, first you have to combine like terms before you start working on the rest of the algebra. Pause the video, finish this one. Now 7 and 8 are just like 5 and 6. You just need to look carefully. Is it one where it's talking about something's between? Or is it one where it's talking about a midpoint? Be careful as you go through these. You may want to underline keywords there. Be sure you draw your pictures and then carefully do your algebra parts. Also be sure on each one of these that you're finding the exact part that it's asking for at the end. Don't stop when you get X. Make sure you plug it into the right part to get the right answer. Okay, the back of this page is still like the problems we saw on the first day of the notes. And these I just called miscellaneous problems because these were kind of some different problems that didn't fall into the ones on the front. Here we have the ones where this is actually on a number line. Notice this was not telling you links, this is actually telling you where points are. So we're putting this actually on a number line. A is at this point here. C is at this point here, and I'm looking for where B is if B happens to be the midpoint. Remember, on these kind of problems, all you needed to do was go back and plug it into our formula for midpoint. Plug this in for X, plug this in for C, and find B. Remember, you had to simplify. Same thing on this one. And these two look slightly different because these have actually not the midpoint, but part of the way through. So I'm finding where point W is, and it happens to be this far through. So this is where we're going to use our formula that we had earlier. Remember, here's our formula from the other side of the page. And notice this part here. They tell me that P is 1. So right here, I'm going to plug in a 1 for this part. And if you plug in 1 for P, what do you get for this? Write it down. Now here's my two endpoints that I can plug in for this to find where my point is 1/3 of the way. You're going to do this one the same way. Notice that it tells us what to plug in for P. Pause the video and finish working through all of these problems before you go on to the next part of the video. Okay, now we're going to start working on the stuff that was from day 2. Remember that our midpoint formula now has X's and Y's in it. So here is our formula we had for midpoint. We wrote this at the top of our notes on day 2. And then I copied it down. And remember, I told you that the only tricky part about this is keeping your X's and your Y's separated. If it helps you to make colors for the X's and Y's, do that. I did that here just like we did in the notes. Put your X's here and your Y's here. Calculate each part of it. Now on this one, it's the same thing. It's worded a little different, but notice that it's asking the same thing. Organize your work the same. Now this problem is a little bit different, but it's like one on the test, so I want to go through and kind of explain how this works because it's got some vocab words that maybe you're not familiar with. It drew out this quadrilateral for us. Kind of looks like it's probably a rectangle, but it's kind of set at this funny angle. And it first says, how can you tell if diagonals are congruent? Well, first you need to know what a diagonal is. A diagonal goes from one corner to the other corner of the figure. So here's one of our diagonals. That would be DB. And here's our other diagonal, AC. Now it says, how can I tell if they're congruent? Remember that congruent means same size and same shape. Well, in this case, they'd be the same shape because they're both line segments, but same size would mean they have to be the same length. Well, how can I tell if they're the same length? Would that have to do with midpoint, or would that have to do with distance? Well, the midpoint just tells me where the middle of them are, so that doesn't tell me anything about the length of them. So if I wanted to know if the diagonals are congruent, I would need to use the distance formula. And then compare them and see if the distance formula is the same. Then our second question here says, how can you tell if the diagonals bisect each other? Well, you need to know that bisect means to cut something into two equal parts. By the way, you should be writing down everything I'm writing down here. It is on the Google form to turn in as part of your grade for this, but it's also good information that you need to know for the test. I'm going over this because you've got test questions that can ask questions like this. So to bisect something, it means that it cuts it into two equal parts. What have we talked about lately that's talking about cutting something in two equal parts? Well, that's the midpoint. A midpoint cuts a segment into two equal parts. So if I wanted to know if these diagonals bisect each other, I would need to see if they have the same midpoint.